50% of women abandon their careers in tech by the age of 35.
We think that's unacceptable, and it's exactly why we started this podcast.
I'm Jo Keneally, tech veteran and writer.
And I'm Jarisha Nadaraju, Product Ops Leader and Startup Advisor.
We're The Other Half, a podcast for ambitious women navigating their way.
This episode is brought to you by PCX Pay, helping businesses move money across borders with speed, clarity, and control. Simplify your payments infrastructure at pcxpay.com. We've partnered with Clue for Season 3 of The Other Half. Clue is the science-backed period and cycle tracking app that helps you understand your body, from cycle predictions and hormone insights to fertility tracking and mood patterns. As a listener of The Other Half, you have exclusive access to a whole free year of Clue Plus. Just head to the link in the show notes to claim it.
On today's episode, we're joined by Lesley Sackey, boxing champion and founder of Pillow AI, a platform supporting survivors of domestic abuse. We discuss Lesley's journey into tech, why you should always back yourself, and how her own experiences in life and sports have shaped her as a founder.
Lesley, welcome to the Other Half podcast. We are so excited to have you on today. How are you doing?
I'm really great. I'm really glad we could make it happen.
Yeah, I'm very excited. We got introduced through a mutual friend and another founder in the tech space. And yeah, Joe and I, after looking at your profile, we were amazed at the things that you have done in your career. It's really amazing. And also the inspiring work that you're doing with Pillow. And we're going to get into all of that. But to start off with, Lesley, you were the first British woman to win gold in the EU Boxing Championships, and you've represented England and Great Britain internationally. That is an amazing achievement, and I think you're the first sort of professional sports person on our podcast over the seasons. What did elite boxing teach you about yourself that you couldn't have learned any other way?
Oh, wow. So many things. I think one of the biggest things was that it helped me tap into a reservoir of resilience that I didn't know existed until I had to draw on it, to be honest. And I think there's something about boxing in particular that can really push you to those depths of kind of finding out what have you got, what's in you, like how can you push forwards, how can you kind of get through something, how can you overcome, how can you shift your mindset, and how can you do something that not everybody is doing and show up for that every day and move towards that goal. So there's so many things it taught me, but what I would say that the standout thing for me is definitely helping me tap into resource or reservoir of resilience that I think does exist within all of us, but I think it takes unique situations and conditions to draw on that and see what we're truly made of, I guess.
Lesley, I think that's such a powerful word that you used in answering that, which is that focus on resilience. The sport taught you resilience, and obviously as a founder, you're going to have to navigate so much going through that founder journey, and it requires so much of resilience. So the fact that you were able to tap into that through your background in sports and bring that into your founder journey is amazing. I know that for myself and maybe other people in life who haven't done maybe sports at a professional level and have pushed ourselves to that extent, have sometimes found that resilience from going through some very difficult life events and things, which is sometimes unfortunate, that you've got to be exposed to these really difficult things in order to tap into this side of yourself. So yeah, it was just really interesting that, sport was able to give you that, which is cool.
There's something I want to add to that. Two things. Firstly, I was terrible at sports at school, so I wasn't into sports. I got into boxing in my early 20s as a way to keep fit, and it just kind of snowballed. And so I think, of course, the obvious connection with elite athletes and sport is doing something that pushes and drives you at a high level, which then is transferable in all other areas of your life. Beyond that, I think there's something around people going through difficult or hard times and having to experience or understand that level of resilience in order to get through it. But I think sport is just one vehicle for that, but actually it's really about being uncomfortable. And so when we're uncomfortable or challenged or put through something, there's growth on the other side of that. And that's the resilience. And that is actually really, I think resilience is the ability to trust in yourself, which is I trust that no matter what this obstacle is, no matter what this really emotionally draining or upsetting or traumatic experience, I trust that I'm going to find a way through. And that is the core essence of resilience, right? So I think it's really just, unfortunately, we do have to go through hard or uncomfortable things in order to learn and grow. And that doesn't just apply for me in a sports context.
Yeah, that point on trusting yourself is so important. Also, Lesley, I will say you've given me a lot of hope as somebody who was also terrible at sports at school, to know that there are other paths ahead of us. I've heard you describe your move into tech, so obviously you're the founder of Pillow AI, and you've mentioned it was about following a problem rather than a plan. Can you walk us through what that journey was like and how you came to found Pillow?
Pillow was born out of a need for something that I felt didn't exist. And so I had left an abusive relationship and was navigating the very nuanced journey, which is 1 minute you're dealing with very practical things like how do I get my ex off my bank account, to, more emotionally heavy lifting, finding a therapist or having to navigate co-parenting, understanding the rules and the laws around what does that look like. And so it felt like a minefield of energy draining, time specific, demographic specific situations that I felt was designed to keep women in this position of survival. And I wanted to thrive, and I wanted to have steps or resources that would help me do that. And so I thought there was a lot of conversations around AI and the changing face of that. And I thought, what if we could use tech for good and find a solution that could streamline a lot of these experiences and problems for women so that they can get to thriving? And how can we do that in a way that feels human-centered and trauma-informed? And so Pillow was born.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know it's not the easiest topics to speak about as well. You mentioned obviously there was so many practical elements that you needed to work through, from finding a therapist to the practicalities of bank accounts and co-parenting. I wonder, when did you feel you were in a space where you could actually think about tackling this problem from a tech point of view? Because I would imagine after experiencing such a difficult experience, that actually that takes a lot of time before you can move from survival to thriving. How was that timeline for you?
I think it's quite a long process of maybe a 7 to 10 year process. And so, of course, initially I felt like I was definitely in survival state, and it's focusing on what we call the crisis element. And so as I progressed on my journey, and it was this post-crisis, what now? How do I rebuild my life? And for me at the time, it brought me back to boxing. And so I thought, I'd felt quite disempowered for so long. I'd spent a long time actually working with corporates and organizations, helping them adapt to champions culture and mindset within employees, empowering women. I've spent over 20 years working in that space. And so I felt like I wanted to reclaim some of that for myself. And boxing felt like that was the tool that I would use in order to do that. So after a 10-year hiatus and 3 babies and a hip replacement later, I thought, I'm going to have one last boxing fight. And so I did. And in doing that and having that process, I realized that it took on a different meaning to me in terms of showing up, training, and trying to reconnect with the things that made me feel good again. And so I decided that I wanted to share that experience with other women and use boxing as a tool to empower and heal and just bring women together, and not centered around this story of trauma all the time, but actually showing what's possible, that you can triumph over trauma. And I think as I was doing that and trying to live that myself, it snowballed, and I created an organization, a social enterprise called Fight Forward, which does exactly that. It helps connect women and use boxing as a vehicle for them to feel empowered. And so through that, I was having lots of conversations with women who are on their post-crisis journey, and again being reaffirmed and validated that that same gap that existed, which motivated me to find a solution, was being highlighted again and again. And so I think at that point, in answer to your question, I think there comes a point when most women you'll find on this journey, the further along they are, they start looking to seeing how can I support others, how can I contribute, how can I help other women in this situation, which I think is indicative of where you're at on the healing journey. And so that's kind of how it went about.
I mean, I love what you said there, Lesley, about almost, I don't know if it's changing the narrative in a way or reclaiming, a version of yourself that, maybe was lost in that experience that you had. And now, wanting to get that back for yourself, but then also help other women find it so that as they move through their healing journey, they're also able to feel empowered and feel better, and taking the sort of human-centered approach to all of it while you do it. I think that's such a great way of looking at things. And also the fact that women, as they're able to heal and come from something that's taken them to rock bottom, I've spoken to other people too who have gone through different things, and they do kind of think, okay, well, what can I do with this now? Like, how can I help others so that they don't have to navigate it in the same way that I did? How can you help shape that path for others? So it's awesome that that's what you're trying to do with Pillow. As you've mentioned, Pillow came directly from your own experience of leaving that abusive relationship. And, you also mentioned this is quite a nuanced space to navigate. It's very complex and difficult for anyone to go through. So building in a space that is so emotionally charged must obviously come with quite a lot of weight to it, day to day. And I'm just curious about, how do you protect yourself when your work is so close to your own story?
I think there is a degree of separation for me, because I feel like at this point I'm sharing my story for context, right? And so you spoke about kind of changing the narrative, and I'm hugely motivated. But I understand the power of storytelling. When I reflect on the personality as a child, even, I've always been a disruptor. I've always pushed back against things that have limited me, or people's beliefs that have limited me. I've been the underdog many times, and I actually do quite well in those scenarios, which I've learned about myself. And that's not just within the boxing context. And so I think I'm motivated because I'm tired of that narrative of a woman cowering in the corner, and it actually prohibited me from acknowledging that I was in an abusive relationship, because I am confident. I'm a boxer. How can I possibly be in a situation like that? It's for weak women. It didn't translate. And so I felt like there's real power in storytelling. So from the aspect of working in Fight Forward and showing this very powerful image of women stepping into the ring, immediately has a ripple effect. And then what we're doing with Pillow is changing the story and narrative around women in these situations who are not just from one specific socioeconomic background, that women aren't CEOs and barristers and leaders and educators. There's no space for them to come forward and acknowledge what's happening to them because it's not reflected. And so that's hugely limiting. And so I think when I share my story, it not only helps women connect, and it gives them permission to share their own. So that motivates me. And I think there's a level of separation and understanding that I'm sharing, not to, I guess, even trauma bond or from a shock aspect. It's for context as to why this is needed, and actually why 1 in 3 women globally are experiencing or will experience this in their lifetime. So that's hugely motivating for me.
Thanks for sharing that, Lesley. It's a lot to unpack, with all of these things. But I'm shocked by the statistic that you said, that it's 1 in 3. I did not realize that that's how common it is for. It's domestic abuse with women, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah. So at one point, 1 in 3 women globally will experience abuse in their lifetime.
You would think that everybody would be on this problem, right? That's such a powerful stat, and it's not the case. So that in itself is just so telling, and I think it's amazing that you are building in the space, and you're able to separate it and say you're using your story for context and also to help other people see themselves in this, right? Because it takes a lot of bravery to be able to stand up and say that this happened to me and me as a boxer and all of these things that have to do with your identity, and move it away from maybe the stereotype that women see. This is not the same at all, but one of the things Joe and I have looked into with this podcast is just the amount of women in senior leadership positions who end up facing lots of problems in the workplace, from sexism and toxic managers who are gaslighting them and all of these things. And it is actually so prevalent, but you don't have people talking about it openly and saying that this has happened to me. And so whatever it is that we're doing, by more people coming forward and sharing stories and doing that, it allows others to say, oh, it could happen to them, it's happening to me, and are able to step forward.
Absolutely. I think there's collective healing. We can't do things in isolation. And again, speaking about it from a different perspective, if it doesn't connect with you in terms of the statistics on a human level, then know that if as a business, you're running a business and say you have 500 employees, and in an ideal world, half of them are female, that's a third of your workforce impacted. Around 80 employees who are 4 times more likely to turn up late for work. 75% of them will report that their perpetrators will turn up to work and disrupt the workplace. And in total, it's costing, according to the Home Office, over £14 billion a year to organisations and businesses due to lost turnover, high turnover, employee absenteeism. And so this is why I'm building, not only because it's a solution that women need, but it's a solution that society needs. It's a solution that the economy needs. It's a solution that organisations and the NHS need in terms of alleviating the overwhelm that is burdened on the system as a result of this problem. And then the bigger picture is that actually there's legacy here in terms of if we are able to help women to really heal, they're less likely to choose abusive partners again. Any person, any woman raising children in this situation are either 50% more likely to be raising children who are perpetrators or victims. And so the long-term effect of that means that there's a reduction, hopefully, in the number of victims or perpetrators that are being raised as a result of women who have resources and can actually thrive, as opposed to just getting through day to day.
Absolutely. I am completely shocked by the stats that you shared as well, and I know that we said that earlier. And also, and this is quite a terrible thing to say, but it's also true, often these difficult societal problems don't get the attention they deserve unless you actually put an economic number on them, and that 14 billion is maybe what will make some people who have power wake up. But you mentioned it in that business context, and obviously you are building a tech product and you are a founder as well. Pillow is AI powered. It's a trauma-informed recovery companion, if I've got that correct, that works with employers, charities, councils, wellbeing teams, as well as a tool that women can use directly themselves. AI, obviously a very powerful tool, but can you maybe talk through how it actually works in this context? Because it is such a deeply human and complex and nuanced issue, and AI at the end of the day is not human. So how do you think about using it within your product?
Absolutely. So we're very early stage. So what we've been spending our time doing is really working with survivors. So we're designing with as opposed to designing for, which I think is a huge difference in building in this space. So that takes a little more time, and working and understanding what are the needs and how do we communicate effectively to get the best result for the users. And so we've been working a lot with a team of UX designers who are trauma informed, and so that will then inform how we use the AI. So at the moment we've run a 3-month pilot with around 50 women in terms of understanding what were the needs. We ran on a community group understanding what the aspects were broken down into, from finance to emotional support to practical resources, accessing organizations and charities that can support, as well as business development, career development. What are the things that are important to women in this space? And so based on that, we've then used that as our basis and conducted our own trauma-informed report that will then inform the design. And then we're going to go on to looking exactly at how we want to use AI in terms of streamlining the process, but actually keeping the focus on the human. And so that starts actually first with the user experience, which is what we're working with.
That's really interesting. I also loved your point that you're, building this with, not, for, because I think often, again, when you are in a difficult situation, people can make a lot of assumptions what you need, but actually it is your own voice that can be the most powerful thing in that context. I'm slightly ignorant on this point, but can you maybe give us like a quick overview of what it actually means to be trauma-informed, and maybe how we can bring this into the workplace as well? Because I don't think I fully understand the term.
Absolutely. So to be trauma-informed is to understand that the person you may be dealing with there's a different way of communicating that may have affect their emotional state, or how you respond physically or verbally can have an impact in terms of how you're delivering something. So for example, testing with pillow is we're understanding that lots of women with trauma perhaps have neurodiverse needs, right? And so how are we building something that caters that into account? There's a huge amount of overwhelm when it comes to women suffering from trauma. And so how do we create an experience that, of course, we want to help them? So we're understanding that we're providing resources and access to different things. But how do we think about that user experience from their point of view so that they don't feel the overwhelm and then actually doing more harm than good? So trauma-informed practice is about understanding the needs of the vulnerable person and designing and building an environment that caters to that. So it actually does more good than harm.
Lesley, thank you for sharing that definition on trauma-informed, which was very helpful. As Joe mentioned, I also hadn't heard it before, so that's really interesting to note. You've touched on a few of these things already about, obviously building Pillow AI and the fact that it came from your personal story. How do you think about the line between authentic leadership and protecting your own privacy and well-being in this type of environment and space that you're building in?
I think within this space, and I think within life, and whether you've been through something traumatic or not, which if we're really honest, everybody has at some point, I think boundaries and understanding where the space should exist between what feels honest and also what feels like somebody is overstepping and making you feel uncomfortable. And that can be from a relationship perspective, which often when I reflect on my own journey, I didn't have boundaries, or I didn't feel safe to express those boundaries. So then therefore they're violated. Again, in the work context, it happens all the time, not setting or creating boundaries. So then there's either an expectation that you're going to constantly be a certain way and people can kind of do what they will with that. Or there's a lack of, trust or confidence in your ability to set those boundaries because perhaps you think it will convey a certain message, or a million different reasons. So I think it's understanding, again, it's confidence. Confidence is self-trust, right? And so the ability to trust yourself first. And I think that authentic leadership, it starts with self. And so if you can understand and create that relationship of trust with yourself, then you're able to set boundaries that protect the self.
I think that's sometimes a really difficult lesson to learn. And maybe particularly, I'm saying it from my own point of view, but as like women and people of color in the workplace, because inherently I do have boundaries now, and I've learned it the hard way, and also protecting, that and having that sense of self. But oftentimes you are trying to almost like go above and beyond and like running and proving yourself and taking on so many things, and there's an element of people pleasing, and
we want to be liked.
Yeah, you want to be liked, and it feels like you have to put in more effort, and there's just so many things that in a way you're almost completely wired to not be someone who creates these firm boundaries. And even if you try putting it in practice, it feels completely foreign. It feels like maybe you're creating friction or just saying something that's going to get you in trouble in a way.
It's practice. It's like, I'm going to bring it into the boxing context, but you have to, it's training. And the only way you learn in the boxing context, the only way I learn to keep my hands up is when I get jabbed in the face. In the context of the fight, I'm like, oh, I don't want to get jabbed in the face. Let me keep my hands up. I mean, and another example of that is going back to this thing of going above and beyond, wanting to be liked or respected. Actually, how about I feel that way about myself, and how you respond to that is about you and not about me. And so if we look at two boxers who step into the ring, one of the things that I love about boxing is the ability to go toe to toe and all out. Everybody's kind of throwing jabs and throwing shots and landing shots. And at the end of it, you'll often see, no matter the amount of trash talking or whatever's gone on, you'll see two boxers shake each other's hands or give each other a hug, because there's such respect for what each other has had to contend with in order to be there in the first place. And I think that's really what it's about, is just having an understanding to and respect for what it takes to actually step into the ring and show up. And how your opponent responds is how they respond. You can only respond in your way, really. And so I think that's a true testament in terms of, yeah, how that experience will land for you. And we only learn, unfortunately, by feeling or experiencing and then doing something differently.
Yeah, I really like that point about applying that respect to yourself. And I think there's just so many points there, because often as women, I think we're conditioned from a very young age to be likable and to almost like appease other people in environments, which sometimes doesn't help in the workplace. And that can often mean to crossing your own boundaries or being hyper aware of people's perceptions of you as well. And one of the points you mentioned about how people react to you in the workplace, because they might think that you will react XYZ way because of your prior experiences. I think that's a fear a lot of women have, even on smaller things like, oh, if I come across too angry in a meeting or too enthusiastic about something. And I want to bring it back to a point that you made actually at the beginning of the podcast. You know, a lot of women are worried that if they share these experiences, they will be defined by them. But I guess like one of the advice you gave earlier was actually you're saying, you know, when you're in the ring, you have to change your mindset really quickly about things. Do you have any practical tips about how, when you are in those difficult moments, whether it is like an awkward meeting or workplace, which sometimes you have your fight or flight emotions going, how do you think about changing your mindset in those moments? Or do you have any advice when you are in those particular situations?
I think, again, it comes back to training, which is, again, a boxing analogy, which is no boxer steps into the ring for a fight without having done training. And I think if you look at it in the boardroom context, I speak a lot about this. I like deliver workshops on this around it's you have to constantly be activating a muscle so that those reflexes show up in those highly charged competitive environments. And so what do those look like? Like tools, actual preparation tools. How do you speak to yourself outside of these situations? How do you reflect? How do you meditate? Do you take a moment of stillness and reflection so that you can see what's going on and adapt accordingly? And so I think it doesn't happen in that moment when you're under pressure. It's the preparation that has to go into preparing you to be in those environments. And I think everybody's version of that can be slightly different, but is that making sure that you have this brain trust of people who you love to speak to, who really boost you up and cheer you on, and maybe it's surrounding yourself with them, you know, before you're having one of these meetings. There's a million different versions to create that, but it doesn't happen in the moment. It requires training, it requires presence of attention, it requires getting punched in the face and then responding. It's all of those things, and I think that gives you the tools and the confidence to be adaptable And the more you exercise those muscles, I guess, I don't know, the easier it gets, but the more resources that you have to respond accordingly.
I like it, like viewing it as training, because sometimes when you're in these situations, they can feel like overwhelming, as if this is a defining moment. But actually, by thinking about training, it's like a recurring theme, right? You're going to have more shots or matches where you can practice this. You know, it's not just a one-time thing. And I think that's a really kind of powerful message to remind yourself of as well.
Yeah, Leslie, I was just going to add to that to say, as you were saying that, I was thinking at the moment, something for me top of mind is I'm really trying to learn how to regulate my nervous system. I'm actually being very intentional about that. Like, when do I feel like I'm being triggered? Like, what is that feeling in my body? How do I notice it day to day? It's the first time in my life I'm actually quite focused on this. And I'm finding, just even in like, I guess the past month that I've been doing this, is that by actively working on it, figuring things that are going to calm me down or bring me back, when I show up in a meeting now or at work, all the factors are still there, right? I'm going to have an urgent ping. I'm going to be called into something. Something's going to happen. I'm going to be put in the situation. But I am operating largely from a calmer place. I can feel it. And that comes from practice. Like you're saying, I'm training myself to be in those situations. I mean, this is my focus, but it's helping me in how I show up and how I navigate situations that are being thrown at me at the moment.
Absolutely. I think life is lifing. Like, it doesn't, what happens or what occurs doesn't change. You're always going to experience challenges of some sort, but it's definitely having, I always refer to it as a backpack of tools. And the more things you expose yourself to, the more practices, the more people you're in conversation with, the more experiences, the more vulnerability you show in terms of being open to new experiences and understanding. It all contributes to this toolkit or this backpack full of stuff. Kind of like this Mary Poppins bag, you just like put your hand in and there's like out comes something. It's that, which is exactly as you're describing in those meetings. Actually, like, you have awareness, so you're like, I see what's happening here. I've got just the thing for that. I'm just gonna breathe, or I'm just gonna fully ignore what you're saying because I would respond and I'd be triggered, but it's practice. It takes work. And yeah, anyone who thinks it's just an arrival, it's not. And I think that's the illusion. And I think it puts people off from even starting.
I love the toolkit. I mean, the backpack slash Mary Poppins metaphor. It's also deeply personal. It's personalized for every person, right?
Yeah.
No Mary Poppins bag is the same. Everybody has to figure out what works for them and tap
Yeah.
into that. But yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of, putting yourself out there and having to adapt to new situations all the time, I'm sure you've experienced some of that while fundraising. And one of the things you mentioned in the past is you felt there was a need for almost like braver capital in the impact space. How have you found fundraising for Pillow, given that it has such a strong social mission and it's very unlike, I guess, the other organizations or companies that tend to get like VC or, that type of funding?
I think I had to get jabbed in the face quite a few times, if we're using the boxing analogy, and then kind of be like, okay, how am I going to respond to this? Which is, I'd quite naively was like, this is amazing. I'm going to build this like prototype and I'm going to get funding, share the story, get funding, and we're going to build and test and it's going to be great. And actually, it's not. It's a lot of conversations. There's a lot of, okay, why don't you try this? It's a lot of people telling you, oh, this is it's a great cause and everything, but how does it make money? And so really having to straddle the social impact aspect, but showing actually this is a viable business. And so I told you about how I quite thrive in being the underdog. And I feel like that's what I am in this space. And so I've had to pivot before I've even started to build, which is, okay, let me go back and really build something robust, not perfect, because otherwise founders will stay kind of like, just always the advice is like, just build something, like something rough to show what it does. And so I decided to go back to the people I wanted to serve, really understand what the needs were, and create this wireframe to then show, okay, this is what I'm going to do and this is how I want to raise money. But that was after I even done Antler, which was, you know, an 8-week VC residency, which was amazing. Like, you know, definitely interesting learning curve, but understanding at this stage, is it the right space? No, because it's about building hard and fast. And actually, I have to build with intention as well and awareness of who I'm building for. But can it absolutely be scalable and VC backable? I have no doubt. But before I try to get to the, you know, WBC boxing championships, let me actually do the groundwork and have a few fights, get some experience, understand what that is before I'm trying to go there. So it's a lot of adapting.
I really like that focus on adaptability. I think when you're building a product, it doesn't matter what the product is, but especially when it's one that feels so personal, you can really, you know, be so attached to it as a baby and not want to make any changes and want to adapt the world to like fit your vision. Whereas actually often if you want to get things done in life, you have to, you know, work with the world to get your vision done. And so it's like finding that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I will say is that I don't feel attached to Pillow in that way, which I think has been also something I've had to convey. Yes, it was born out of my own personal needs to build something that I didn't get, but I'm not so attached to it that I can't see how it can shift and change shape. And particularly because I think part of me really wants to prove it's a viable business as opposed to just, you know, oh, something nice that can support women. It's like, if we're looking at the numbers, it's billions of women globally who are experiencing this problem. How cool is it to build a product that not only helps them, but can be highly successful in doing that and have, you know, many different forms of revenue?
Lesley, you've kind of touched on this already as you were explaining this, and you know, you spoke about the fact that you went on Antler and you were in that space, and then obviously going off and to raise capital, but then also speaking to your customers, understanding that, you know, their problems and what they're going to want from it, and then thinking about that as you came up with your product or a version of your product to pitch. It made me think about just the fact that you're someone who came into the tech world without a traditional tech background, and now you're thrown into the space with fundraising and product MVPs and wireframes and all of these things. You know, how did you actually find that, you know, transitioning, and, you know, what kind of surprised you with moving into the tech space?
My journey into boxing, I was working in music marketing and business, and so to go into boxing was not a space I was familiar with. There were no women around at the time. So I think those things don't faze me. I think if I feel connected to or in purpose with, then that's what it is. And I think I've done that throughout my life. And when I reflect, I always joke that I've always been entrepreneurial. I think it does come back to self, like understanding who you were and who you are. And so without sounding cliche, I think that then informs the way that you want to build and create, whether that's personally, professionally, spiritually. And I think if I look back on the type of person that I was from a young age, I've, been disruptive in the most positive way. I've been entrepreneurial. I always laugh about my first business was selling friendship bands in primary school. It was a business called Strings, and I used to sell them for like 50p or whatever, and then buy threads and then do it again. Like, I just, you know, and I think, oh, that 8-year-old was cool. And I think I'm just a version of that again. And I think it's, I see it with my own children. I have 3 girls, and, you know, my youngest is 10, but from an early age, she's known who she was. She's set boundaries. She'd come home from nursery and be like, I don't like people in my space. I don't like people, you know, touching me. And I'm like, great. Because I learned from a young age, like, that's rude, or you can't say that, or that's not how girls behave, and it's not true. And then now here we are on podcast talking about how that's impacted us. So
Hey, that's a fantastic point. I mean, and I think it's a really powerful thing also for women in particular who have ideas of things that they want to pursue, but maybe think, oh, I'm not a technical founder. You know, they've worked in tech, but they think they're not technical, or I can't do this because I don't have that. And the most powerful thing, at least that's coming through for me throughout this, is someone who deeply understands themselves and backs themselves. And
Yeah.
I would just say to VCs out there, maybe that is what you should be prioritizing, looking for in a founder way more than someone who just has a tech background and has worked at XYZ company. Because I think those are the type of people that are actually going to be able to truly drive something forward and make a meaningful impact. So, Lesley, thank you so much for sharing that. Finally, we are at time with you, but I feel like Joe and I could probably dig into so many of your answers. The other half is that, you know, Joe and I started this podcast to help women navigate challenges that they face in the workplace. You know, women who want to move forward and progress in the workplace or building their own businesses too as founders. You've navigated so much in your career. Can you share what has been the single hardest moment in that journey and how you got through it?
Oof, single. In my whole career.
Yeah, or one of them. Pick one moment that was hard.
Oof.
Yeah.
My God, there's too many to think of. But one moment that feels hard, I guess. In terms of my boxing career, there was a moment when I was on Olympic selection and they were announcing if female boxing would be in the 2012 Olympics. And I was on the team and they announced the three weight categories and I was in between the weights. And so I had nowhere to go, basically. So that was the end of the Olympics. And so it was bittersweet because on the one hand, I think it was a newly acquired dream. I'd done a lot in a short space of time. And I was like, hey, like you've gone to the Europeans, you've won the British Championships. Like you used to hate pee and smoke cigarettes on the tennis court. So from that to this, like great. But I think because it was a new dream. And so I was excited about it. So it felt, and I think it didn't feel good because it wasn't so much about my ability. It was about the rules that existed. And so they could only let a certain amount through. And I think that was hard for me as opposed to you're just not good enough or whatever. I think that sucked for me because I was like, this isn't even about me per se. But, you know, it kind of, yeah, I then made an Olympic sport out of having babies and had three in a short space of time. So, I mean, everything for a reason, you know?
Everything does work for a reason. Oh my God, my heart broke slightly for you there. And I think that point of, you know, it was completely out of your control. And sometimes you can break the rules and sometimes you can't. But look, things have definitely worked out well now. And I'm sure your 8-year-old disruptor self would be absolutely thrilled with what you're building at the moment and what their life you've created. How can people get in touch with you? What's the best way to do that, Lesley?
Okay, so when it comes to Pillow, at the moment, if you go to getpillow.ai, we're running a campaign called, you know, Drop Your Baggage, where you can share your story anonymously. So there's no connection to you or traceable in that respect. You just get to offload and get whatever you're feeling off your chest. And then you have the choice to then continue the journey and sign up to like the Pillow waitlist. So that's one way. The second thing is that we're currently on our 4th cohort for Fight Forward, where we're training a group of women. Most of them are survivors. We train them for 10 weeks to have that same experience where I trained and step into the ring at the end of it. And Fight Night is on the 30th of May at the legendary All Stars Boxing Gym near Ladbroke Grove. It's an amazing night, vibes, DJ, bar, family friendly. And really, it's just about literally that triumph over story piece, triumph over trauma story, and really celebrating the bravery of women doing something that feels uncomfortable but reclaiming something for themselves. So you can get tickets to support us, you can donate through the crowdfunder, and if you're interested in having further discussions around, you know, delivering trauma-informed workshops around this issue in the workplace, also you can email me at leslie@getpillow.ai. All the platforms, Lesley the Boxer Sackey. You can put them in the links.
Yeah, we'll absolutely put those in the show notes. Thanks again for your time, Lesley. It's been great.
Amazing. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps others find us. Even better, share it with a friend or colleague who needs to hear this. Thanks, and see you next time.